Building upon what we have learned in XHTML, we will add meta tags to our pages in Dreamweaver to help search engines understand what is contained within our pages, so that those search engines will perceive our pages as useful content for a website visitor, and hopefully display your page when someone searches on the subject matter of your site in a search engine query.
In this lesson, we'll look at using Dreamweaver to edit our external style sheet. To get started, I'll launch Dreamweaver. And within Dreamweaver, I defined quickly a site similar to that which we defined for Chapter 9, except this time pointing Dreamweaver towards a local site in the Chapter 10 folder, which I did in exactly the same way as we did in a previous lesson, just by pointing Dreamweaver to the Chapter 10 folder for the local root folder field and the images directory inside Chapter 10 for the default images folder. To get started, I'll bring up the lesson_01_home.html file, which is similar to the file that we've been working on in previous lessons, and I'll look in the code view. On the right-hand side of my screen, I can see the CSS Styles panel.
If for some reason you don't have the CSS panel on the right side of your screen, go up to Window and make sure CSS Styles is checked.
If you, from the top of your screen, select the Designer workspace, that will bring that panel back to its default location for this workspace, which you'll probably become accustomed to working in as you begin your career as a web designer. When you look at the CSS Styles panel, you can see that listed under the All Rules title is the name of the CSS file that's associated with the HTML file that you're editing. And sure enough, you can see the name of that CSS file, which I've highlighted here in blue, listed inside the source code of your HTML file. Because we specified this file name, lesson_01_home.css, as a linked file in our HTML code, Dreamweaver sees that link and presents us the CSS style sheet as an option to edit in the CSS Styles panel. We also have the option to edit the CSS file directly by using the Files panel, and I'll expand the Files panel a little bit so that it's a little easier to see. And I can see the CSS style sheet associated with this file just as I can any other file, and if I double-click on it, I can edit it just as I would if I was using TextEdit or Notepad on the PC. I'm going to close this CSS file so that I can also show that within the context of the document window, my document being my HTML file, I have an option to preview and edit the attached CSS style sheet by clicking on this button, which is immediately to the right of the source code button. And I can switch back by clicking on source code to see the source code of my HTML file. And I can click on the button again to switch back and edit my CSS style sheet. I'm not going to do this right now because I want to use Dreamweaver's interface rather than editing the CSS style sheets directly. And just as a side note, there is absolutely nothing wrong with editing the CSS style sheet directly. Very often I do that, but sometimes I don't feel like doing that and I want a little bit of help. And the CSS Styles panel is extremely helpful when trying to tackle complex CSS styles. So, if we take a look at the All tab in the CSS Styles panel, we can see a collapsible section next to the name of our CSS style sheet. When I expand that collapsed section, I see all the CSS style rules that we defined in our CSS style sheet. And if I click on one of those rules, such as the rule that redefines the way the body tag is presented in our HTML pages, immediately below my list of rule selectors, I can see the properties for the selected selector, in this case the body tag. When I look at the Properties section of the CSS Styles panel, I can see that there are 3 ways that I can organize this Properties panel. The first shows me all available CSS properties that I can use to modify the selected selector, grouped into collapsible sections. Here we can see there is a font section. If I collapse that section by clicking on the collapsible section icon, I can see sections for background, block elements, etc., etc. I'm going to expand the font collapsible section and take a look at the next button immediately next to the Show Category view, which is the Show List view. And this shows the exact same information, just in one very long alphabetical list, which if I scroll through very quickly, you can see contains some of the CSS styles that we've seen already, listed among all of the available CSS styles that we could apply to this selector. I'll scroll back up to the top. And if we look at the third button, which is Show Only Set Properties, we can see the properties that are specified for this selector in our CSS file. Right now we're only specifying a background color of black. If I switch back over to the design view, in my HTML file we can see that black color in the background. And as you may suspect, if we mouse over this black square in the value column with our properties on the left-hand side, by clicking on the black icon, you get a pop-up list where you can specify a different color, such as gray. And if you click on the Add Property link, you can begin to add options that will modify this rule. I don't actually want to add any options at this time, but I can scroll down and see that there are a great many properties here that I would otherwise have to look up before I could do anything. So this is an extremely helpful way to create valid properties for a given selector without having to do a great deal of research. Now I don't want to leave this background color set to gray. I'm going to click on that icon and set the color of the background of the body tag back to black. Another usage of the CSS Styles panel is for quickly making modifications to a currently selected element inside our web page. I'm going to come over in the design view and click inside the word Remarkable anywhere. If I switch over to the current view, you can see a summary of the CSS styles that are applied to the selected selector, which in this case is a little bit of text with a class attribute associated with it. That class being one we defined in an earlier lesson called red text, which sets the selected text to a shade of red. I might decide that I don't like that shade of red. I want to specify a darker shade of red, because that might be a little too bright. When I specify a different color, every instance of that class, site-wide, changes to the new value. If I were to select another block of text, such as the word telescope, just by clicking on it, I can see the properties that are specified for paragraph elements and unordered list elements contained within the main content ID. And I can change perhaps the font size to a size greater than 12 pixels. Perhaps I specify 14 pixels by clicking inside the font size value field. When I hit the return key on my keyboard, I can see all of that text, which inherits its formatting from the paragraph element contained within the main content ID, updates as soon as I hit the enter button on my keyboard. Now I'll go ahead and switch that back down to 12 point and see the text change back instantly.